On today's episode of Brand New View Podcast, we're honored to have the one and only Bruce Rainnie. Some highlights include hosting CBC Compass with Boomer Gallant, as well as interviewing some of the biggest athletes on the planet. Bruce has gained an immense amount of wisdom from his career in media and involvement with competitive sport. Listen in as Bruce takes us through it all.
I was the same old me with the same old blues. I was the same old me with the same old blues. I was the same old me.
Welcome back to another episode of Brand New View Podcast. I am Ben Brammer with my co-host Mark Boudreau.
How you doing?
And today we have Bruce Rainnie.
Bruce,
good to see you.
You as well.
Where did it all start? Let's go grassroots.
If you want to go really grassroots, I can recall, I actually have this memory of being 2 or 3 years old and watching hockey games with my dad and being just as enthralled with Danny Gallivan, the play-by-play announcer, as I was with Guy Lafleur, who I idolized. So always something, and I don't know what it was, but there was always this genetic chromosomal thing that made me listen to the announcer. And I loved the way Gallivan in particular put verbs together. His choice of words, his often invention of vocabulary was stunning. The Boston Red Sox back in the day came through on WLBZ out of Bangor, Maine, and they had Dick Stockton and Ken Harrelson. I liked listening to these guys. So that's a vivid memory of mine, and it sounds like I'm making it up. I'm not. And my mom, if you go back, she has them somewhere in the house, reel-to-reel tapes. That's how old the tape was.
Yeah.
Of me saying, Mahavich gets the puck over to the fur, shoots, he scores!
So you developed your
It's all
sound
there.
early. Yeah.
It's all there. And I have always loved the art of communication.
Yeah.
Trying to tell a story with a good beginning, middle, and end, with an arc, something that builds to something worth listening to. It's always fascinated me.
That's great. And so you knew from a young age the kind of direction you wanted to take.
Well, I kind of did. I also was I was a pretty good student, and always thought I would be an orthopedic surgeon. I was always fascinated by a phenomenal surgeon in town by the name of Dr. Bill Stanish, who worked with a couple of Olympic teams.
Yeah.
I loved knees back in the day. I was fascinated. What happened to Bobby Orr's knee? Why was this not fixable? So I thought, I was a half-decent athlete, but self-aware enough to know that at 6'1", a little too heavy with no vertical, I was unlikely to play in the NBA. What's the next best thing? I thought orthopedic surgery, work on the athletes who were going to play in the NBA or NHL. But as I got into that, I knew in Dalhousie University there were students in that class of mine that were just grasping it quicker than me and enjoying it more than me. And I still love to talk, and that was something I could do as well as them, if not better. So I thought, well, maybe not orthopedic surgery, maybe broadcasting. I can tell you this, it was a painfully tense family macaroni and cheese dinner when I told my mom and dad, who thought for years they would have an orthopedic surgeon as their son, that I was moving to Yarmouth to be a DJ, as my dad called it.
Same ballpark.
$12,000 a year starting.
Wow.
With the promise that if it went well for the first 8 months, that would be bumped to $12,400.
Wow.
$400 raise if I did well.
That's
so
amazing.
I had to say to them, Mom, Dad, listen, I've got this chemistry thing now. It's there to fall back on, which is parents, their favorite phrase, have something to fall back on.
Yeah, safety net.
Let me go into the world of broadcast. Let me see what happens in Yarmouth. If nothing's happened inside of a decade, then I'll look at something else. But let me go see what happens. And some good stuff happened along the way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's
So-
amazing.
Yeah, you go. So you started down in Yarmouth, and I was telling you off the podcast that I spent a day down there, and it's a great community. What was it like down there? What are some of the things that you still hold with you today?
Well, it was just broadcast education 101. I didn't have a journalism degree. I didn't go to broadcast school. But there, I got to do everything. Host the morning show, host a noon-hour talk show, preside over swap shop, buy, sell, and trade, read funeral announcements, put a newscast together, put a sportscast together, read weather meteorological data, do it all. Make
The whole
mistakes,
thing.
right? You make mistakes, and the main thing I learned, I had a real broadcast mentor by the name of Lou LeBlanc, who used to work in town at Country 101, is what it was called. He took me under his wing years ago, and we had a lunch when I was just a kid, maybe 18 years old, and he told me the best broadcasters in the world are the ones that can be climbing a tree, get stuck on the highest branch, and get back down without you ever knowing that he was stuck. meaning that we've all talked ourselves into corners, but the best broadcasters get into the corner and get back out, and you never knew that he or she was in a corner. I loved that challenge, and that was what I got to do on the fly many a time in Yarmouth, Nova Scotia.
Yeah, I love that. That's an amazing story. I think climbing the tree as an analogy and getting stuck and finding your way out, it's broadcasting 101.
That's it.
Without
And the
anyone else
best
knowing.
ones do it seamlessly,
Yeah.
right? You just never know. Plus at Yarmouth, I know we're talking today probably a bit about interviewing. I remember an absolute defining moment for me. I had a noon hour talk show, 1 hour of talk, okay, and I loved it. And there was this little girl who was just down the road from Clare. It's called Clare, which is in Digby County.
Beautiful
and she
area.
had just won, it is beautiful, yeah, Church Point, that area. She had just won the Nova Scotia Provincial Figure Skating Championship at the age of 11. She was a prodigy,
Wow.
beat everybody, okay? Name was Marie Claire Bourque. And I knew she was a little character. So I said, I want her on the show for a whole hour. I'm good with kids. This will be a great hour. This will be magical, right? So in she came, and she sat down, and a funeral announcement started the show. We at CJLS have been requested to make the following. So that starts the show, and we're just sitting there waiting. And finally, up comes the music for Rainnie at Noon. And here she is, and I say, hi, Marie Claire, congratulations. She goes, thanks. And I go, do you love figure skating? Yeah. Are you good at it? Yeah. Was it awesome to win? Yeah. Do you want to be professional? Yeah. Would you like that someday? Yeah. And I've got an hour to go, right? And I'm about 50 seconds in, and I've totally messed this up.
You've run it out.
I've totally messed it up. All my fault. All my fault. And I learned that day that when you're talking to someone and you really want an answer, what, how, why gets you everything you need.
Open-ended.
Open-ended. If you're talking to someone and they're the least bit nervous, like she was, as she would be, she was 11 years old, right? And you give her the option of answering you with yes or no, she will take that option every time because she's nervous and she psychologically wants it over with. What do you like about figure skating? What was it like when you won? What would it like to be professional? Why is this person your favorite figure skater? What's your favorite move? All of that would have been magical, and I blew it. And I learned that day the hard way that if you really want something special, what, how, why is how you do it. So
Absolutely.
in terms of defining moment, that's something that I hopefully would have learned in a journalism school, I don't know. But learning it on the fly and having it driven into my head, I think was much more impactful, actually.
And you still remember that interview to this day.
Oh
so.
my gosh, yeah.
So
and
many facts.
I don't know how she's done. I don't think she ever, kind of went after figure skating to the degree many thought she would. I hope she's living a good life, but she taught me plenty at the age of 11, so I thank her for
Cool.
that.
That's awesome. She'll be on another podcast. Where are they now?
Find her.
Athletes,
yeah.
yeah.
She's coming up.
So you won a couple of awards while you're living in Yarmouth as well for volunteering. We'd love to hear a bit about that.
Oh, well, that's, I just felt that early. I was there as a kid, 21 to 26 years old, and I wasn't married at the time. I had no kids. I wasn't dating near as much as I would have liked. So I had evenings free, and I figured I'm hosting a morning show, and I want people to listen to me, and I'm from away. I'm not from here. I think it's important for them to realize that I want to be here, and I like their community. And if there's a charity out there that I can make a little bit better by just offering some MC expertise or a little public speaking or a chance to speak after dinner, get a couple of people laughing and make them feel better about their event, I always felt that was part of my job, and I never really asked to get paid for it at the time. I just thought it was a way to build my listenership and get them to know who I was and what my values and morals were.
Yeah.
And I think it served me very well there, and I never did it to receive Yarmouth's Volunteer of the Year, but it was awfully nice when the
Yeah.
mayor shook my hand and
Right.
said, good job,
That's
young
pretty
fella,
cool.
you know.
Well, that's a great way to build a rapport with the community.
Definitely.
I think you have to do it. I did it as well when I lived in PEI for a long time, and I wasn't from PEI. And if you're not from PEI, and people know you're not from PEI, you have to work to make them overlook that fact.
Oh yes, Ben
It
can
just
takes
attest.
years.
Come from
Years.
away.
Yeah.
Come from away.
Yeah.
And I think because I dove headfirst into that community, into charities that were important to me, they never saw me as anything but part of their community. So it's really important, I think, when you're in a new place to show that new place that A, you want to be there, and B, you're going to contribute.
Yeah.
That's the whole point of community, is that we embrace it together. Otherwise, it's a community and you're on the outskirts looking in. That's not
Totally
something you
agree.
want-
Yeah.
That's not something you want to be a part of, especially if you're looking to make an impact on said community.
Well, I wanted it to be good,
Yeah.
right? I wanted people to listen to my morning show, on my
Exactly.
noon hour show, And when you build up that rapport and they meet you in public, and the greatest compliment you can ever get is you're just like you are on radio, or you're just like you are on TV. That's the best, because it means you're being natural and they kind of like you.
You're real.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So
People want authenticity.
that's it. And these were things that were drilled home in that small little coastal town in southwestern Nova Scotia.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So how did you manage to make the jump from Yarmouth to Charlottetown? Was there anything in between, or
Yeah, there was. I was in Yarmouth, and I was happy as could be, being challenged professionally, pretty happy personally. And if I had stayed there for a career, mentally, I was probably going to be okay with that. But there was a woman in Yarmouth by the name of Mary Jane Weber, who was the CBC reporter correspondent for southwestern Nova Scotia. And she and I, just because we were both in the media, got to know each other and got along great. And you want to talk about defining moments. So in 1995, these two legends at CBC by the name of Frank Cameron and Doug Saunders, who hosted a show called Maritimes Tonight, they retired. They were going. And Mary Jane had the in on reading the news, on being the host. She knew I loved sports. She said, "Why don't you apply to be the sports guy?" And I said, okay. So off I drove to Halifax. 41 people applied, but she wanted me. So she tried a little harder in the audition, and we had a really good audition. And so there I was, coming from Yarmouth, Nova Scotia, to be the sports anchor of Maritimes Tonight at CBC Halifax. Did that for a couple of years, moved to do both shows, the Supper Hour and Late Night Show, when Colleen Jones moved over to News World.
Right.
Had a wonderful run there. Ended up hosting the show with Linda Kelly, moving from sports to the actual anchor desk. Again, a great broadcast experience. And here's some great advice from Doug Saunders. Doug and I are pretty good buddies, and he would not mind if I described him as somewhat churly and acerbic. The day I auditioned, I was there writing my script, okay, to be put into the teleprompter. And I was just a kid, and he was kind of a hero sitting there, had sunglasses on, inside. He was that kind of guy. He goes, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm just writing my script to go in the prompter." He goes, "Do you want to be good?" I said, "I'd love to be good." He goes, "Don't ever use the prompter." I go, "Pardon?" "No, you got to be able to talk from your gut. Best ones can talk from the gut." Now, for my audition, I used the prompter, and I used it for my first week. Never used it again.
Wow.
Never used it again. And I think it's the ability to have things coming at you and make sense of them on the fly that separates you as a broadcaster. It's why you can go to an Olympics and cover sports and have all these athletes you've never seen before and somehow tell their story on the fly. And I thank Doug for that. It was a great piece of advice. When you host a news show, you have to use a prompter for news stories, because you don't want to trust your brain to remember charges that have been brought against. You got to use it.
Got to be accurate there.
For my entire career in broadcast, I prided myself on, when I didn't need it for that reason, I never used it. And I think it was Ron McLean, Hockey Night in Canada. He wouldn't know what one is. He's so good off the cuff, right? And so I think if you want to really excel, anybody can really, I mean, to read well is an art, but anybody can read a prompter. It's those moments where you have to extemporaneously make sense of something going on the fly. Drama without a script. If you can act in a drama without a script, you're in a good spot.
It's very similar to sport as well. I mean, if you think the higher up you go, the next level, everything's happening that much quicker. So you have to be able to read and react that much sooner.
Yeah, and the best ones do.
The best ones
do. And that's
do.
why I love covering sport, because as much as you think going into a game, okay, this guy will probably have a good game, or this woman will probably score a key basket, or this team's going to... You have no clue what's going to happen.
It never happens how it's supposed to.
Not a clue.
Never.
And so you might have these preconceived notions, but you got to park them, and you got to tell the story that's unfolding on the fly. And so I go back and I thank the great Doug Saunders for imparting in me kind of the confidence to go without that Linus's security blanket, the teleprompter.
Well, that's nice to hear, because that's kind of the strategy we're trying to use, is have a bit of info, bit of background info, but we're kind of coming into it not really knowing what's going to happen next.
Well, listen, right? I think that's the key. You listen, and you hear something, I wasn't thinking of asking that, but that might be a cool thing to ask.
Right.
That's the essence of it right there, yeah.
Exactly. It's how you can react and make it work, essentially. And it's amazing. We should note to our listeners, Bruce isn't reading any of these facts off. He just has an amazing memory, so it's quite astonishing.
Drives my wife nuts, by the way.
You can remember
12 years
yeah.
ago when you told me? No, I don't. She says. No,
Well,
I
it
don't.
happened.
Yeah.
It happened.
And so here's what happens.
Okay.
So things are going okay in Halifax, but my brother, who I love and worship to this day, he's 4 years younger, very talented guy, really good broadcaster in his own right, totally different style than me, really good. He always said to me, he'd said, and this is an exact quote, if this guy named Roger Yonker, who was my predecessor in PEI, if he ever retires, you should come over because you'd love the weatherman, Boomer. And I thought, what are you talking about? He goes, no, you guys would be unbelievable. And so one time I was in Charlottetown for it was called a CBC sales launch, where basically a lot of people are going, you look wonderful. It was way too stuffy for me.
Yeah.
And I gravitated to this guy over in the corner in a flowered shirt. I never met him. And his name's Boomer Gallant. And he and I got laughing so hard that we were asked to leave the event by CBC executives.
That's
Can you
great.
guys please go? And we're proud of this to this day. So once I met him about a year later, when the chance came to audition for and interview for the job in CBC PEI as the host of Compass, I went for it. And it was a chance to be closer to my brother, who still lives there. And it was a chance to work with this guy in what became a once-in-a-lifetime partnership. I will never have it again, and I know it, and he will never have it again, and he knows it, where you're so comfortable with someone and you absolutely have a total lack of like you're so trustworthy of the other person. I'll throw something at him, I know something's coming back. Same for him to me. Neither of us are going to be offended if we're teased. It was a remarkable relationship, and the island, I can say, they loved it. They loved it. I was there for 13 years, and we kind of, I think, hopefully for a series of people on PEI, a certain generation, defined their generation of Compass viewing, and just loved it. Had a great time with him.
All 100,000 of us tune in every night.
It's got it's the highest viewership per capita in Canada.
I can believe it.
Wow.
Actually, in North America. And this guy, Boomer, of whom I speak, is by far, the most famous human on PEI. The premier of PEI would give anything to have his Q rating and recognizability. It's crazy. He was once the track announcer for harness racing, then he became the weatherman. He's a gregarious, huge personality, and people love him. And even if they don't love him, they watch him because they know something ridiculous is going to happen. And so this was my 13 years there. Plus we hosted a serious news show.
Right.
There were a lot of very serious moments that I enjoyed. But at the end of every night, the island knew to watch to the very end, because we were going to have this 22 to 28 second interaction that was probably going to go off the rails. Neither of us would know why, and it was always, at the very least, watchable. Sometimes really funny, but at the very least watchable and memorable. Not always for great reasons, but memorable.
And that floral shirt you speak of, he probably has 200 of them and wears them all year round.
Yeah, he's got at least over 100.
At
for
least,
sure. Yeah.
well,
I always remember seeing one of those.
So that was 13 years in PEI, and it was wonderful, and I enjoyed every minute of it. But in my head, you guys know who Johnny Carson was?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So when I was growing up, he hosted The Tonight Show. And he left when he was, I think, 62 years old. Still at the very absolute top of his game. Right? Left them wanting more. Followed by Jay Leno, who did a great job but was never as good. Jimmy Fallon, doing a fine job, never as good as this guy. The best ever.
Well, he kind of pioneered the old talk show.
He did. The idea of a band, a desk, a chair, a monologue, a skit.
Yeah, the late night talk show, yeah.
He was the man. And he was still better than, I loved Letterman too, but Carson was the best who ever did it. And what I always admired about him was he kind of left, I am not comparing myself, by the way, to Johnny Carson. What I am comparing is the desire to leave when you're still good, right? And the audience still likes you. And I had a sense that with the new focus on social media, a lot of what I loved about CBC, the kind of relaxed, unimpeded storytelling, was going by the wayside in favor of the quick YouTube clip.
Instant.
Right.
Yep, clickbait.
Right. And so I realized the value in that, but it's not really what I capital L loved. So I figured the show was probably never going to swing back around to the way I loved it originally. So I figured it was a good time to try something else.
Probably didn't lend itself to your style either. the whole instant.
No, because I like to get into things a little deeper, and I never really cared how many people clicked on a post. That was not. I more cared on who was going to stop me in Sobeys to say they liked or didn't like something we did on the show. That meant much more to me. And so the show is still very good, and it's still great. The people that are now the new host and weather person are excellent, and I wish it nothing but the best. But I wanted to leave when I was still proud of it and still proud of what we had done. He wanted to retire, Boomer, so it was a perfect time to move on and try something else.
Great fit.
Yep.
That's excellent. And he's doing well now, I'm sure.
He's great. He's lost like 50 pounds. He looks good.
There you
He's
go.
got a lovely woman in his life, and there is nobody for whom retirement was ever. This is a man who is totally capable of doing nothing every day and enjoying it. So retirement's good for him. Yeah.
I really enjoy that.
I tease him, but that's not far from the truth.
Mhm. Of course. Something I don't know, our viewers may not know is you've interviewed some very big athletes, Sidney Crosby among one of them, and I was kind of wondering, are you kind of drawn to athletes like that elite competitive attitude?
I've always been drawn to anybody who can do remarkable things under pressure. It's always blown my mind how somebody like a Crosby or a Jordan, when most of us would shrink from the hugeness of the moment, they elevate. Crosby's at his best when the game's at its biggest, you know. A lot of us would shrink from that. Not only does he not shrink, he relishes and wants it more than anybody. So he and I first met when he was 8 years old. When I started at CBC Halifax, I started getting phone calls from Cole Harbour almost in week one saying, you got to come see this little kid play. And my skepticism kicked in. We're not going to book a camera, which was a resource at the time, for an evening shoot in Cole Harbour to watch an 8-year-old. But the calls kept coming. And there was this guy in Dartmouth, lived in Dartmouth. He's a Nova Scotia broadcast legend by the name of Pat Connolly. He was 40 years older than me, but he and I were great buddies. And he took care of me, and I worshipped him. And one day he said to me with this huge baritone voice, which was his trademark, he said, go see Crosby. I said, pardon? He goes, I know you're getting calls. Go see him. He's that good. I said, wow. So we went. Score was 13-9 for the Cole Harbour Red Wings over the Shearwater Flyers. And little number 9, who was by 2 years the youngest player on the ice, had 7 goals, 4 assists. It would have been 18 assists if his teammates could have corralled the puck. And afterwards, we sat him down in the dressing room, and he's sitting there. He's got a little gap in his teeth and a little headband on, his first TV interview. And I said, I'll throw him an easy one out of the gate here. I said, when did you first know you were a good hockey player? And his answer, I remember it word for word to this day, because it was the mix of sort of confidence and humility that define him to this day. He says, well, I remember back in novice I had 189 goals in 12 games, and I realized I might have a scoring touch. And I'm laughing in my head saying, you got a scoring touch, young man, you do. And inside his bag, I'll never forget this, he had a little piece of masking tape in his bag, and there were letters on it that had been weathered away by sweat and time. And I said, what does that say? He goes, what? I go, the masking tape. What's on there? What's written on there? Oh, he goes, it says never, ever, ever quit. I said, yeah? He goes, yeah, every time I open my bag, I'm reminded of it. Don't ever quit. And the one thing you can say about him, whether, I know a lot of people, if they're fans of Montreal, Toronto, they probably don't like him. Whether you like him or not as a hockey player, he never takes a shift off. He, even to this day, with all he's accomplished, he could be forgiven for taking a shift off. He doesn't, right? Never, ever, ever quit. This was 8 years old.
Wow, at that age.
Yeah, and just remarkable. And so he and I developed a relationship based on the fact that I would see him every year to continue his story. And we got along great, and there were like nights where I'd take him to Subway after the interview for a little foot-long something. We just always got along wonderfully, and he's, the one thing I can say about him is that to this day, the things that fundamentally make him a person have not changed despite the money and the fame in his life, right? Still, please, thank you, yes sir, no sir, loves his mom and dad, remembers his sister's birthday. All of these things are hugely important to him, right?
And he's so involved in the community and doesn't talk about it. You only hear about it when it's being covered as a news story. When it
Well, here
happens.
I'll give you a classic example. We did a big event at the Hall this summer called the Top 15 Athletes in Nova Scotia History. He headlined it for us. It would not have been as big a dinner without him. He headlined it for us. That night before the dinner, he gave $50,000 to Special Olympics Nova Scotia for the upcoming games that occurred in Antigonish this summer. And I said, do you want me to mention that to the crowd? He goes, nah. Just that, nah, it's okay. Okay, no problem.
Wow.
We'll keep it quiet. Right?
Those
Wow.
core values are
Yeah.
just, they're
Commendable.
strong. Yeah, very commendable.
Kind of went off on a Crosby tangent there,
No,
but
that's
you guys
okay.
brought
It's
him up.
okay.
So,
Yeah.
so
Hey,
yes,
we
your
don't
original
mind.
question was what am I attracted to? I've always found I've been in the luckiest position in the world to interview people like LeBron, Clinton, Crosby, Gretzky, Orr, Lafleur, Martina Navratilova, Roger Federer. I've just been so lucky. And what's attracted me to all of them is that none of them think they're any good. What I mean by that is this. I think they all inside know that they can play their game, but they got this little person on their shoulder that's saying, you can still be better. You can still be better. And that's why Tiger Woods in his prime would be out till 9 o'clock with a flashlight making sure his ball rolled okay on the green, and why Crosby's first on, last off at a practice, and why Katrina LeMay Doan would skate and skate and skate until her thighs were so full of acid she could barely walk, but she wanted to be the best. And they know they're good, but they know they can be better. And that's the short answer to your question.
Mm-hmm.
I've always been fascinated by that dynamic, right? The person on one shoulder who says, you're pretty good at this, and the other person saying, you're not that good.
Yeah.
You could be way better. I love that.
I think that's
Right.
the difference between a great athlete and an elite athlete.
I think it's just the difference between a great person, someone who's accomplished something big, and those that are satisfied with average or mediocrity, right? That
Definitely.
constant desire to just push it.
that drive that we all look for.
You're only as good as your last shift in Crosby's case, speech in Clinton's case, match in Navratilova's case, right?
That I think you hit that on the head for sure.
Yeah.
And that's pretty cool for you. I mean, in order for you to develop your style and to look into what you would like to do, I mean, you focused on those cats and made it work.
and
obviously.
to try to draw that sort of dichotomy out of them in an interview is really fun, right? Try to get inside them and what does make you tick? What motivates you? Is it a pat on the back? Is it a kick in the butt? Is it being left alone? What is it? What drives you? And everybody's different. And if you go with your what, how, why, and you know a bit about them and you listen to them, just magic can happen, right?
Absolutely. And I think you look at it, turn around and look at yourself, what, how, why, to kind of find out what your passion truly is, or what really makes you get up in the morning.
Well,
Makes you tick.
excellent segue, my friend, because I'll tell you. So at the end of this PEI run, when I knew that it probably could come to an end, I had emceed the Nova Scotia Sport Hall of Fame induction ceremony for, at that point, 18 straight years. My hero, Pat Connolly, used to do it, but he was going in 1999, so you can't MC an induction where you yourself are being inducted. So the then CEO of the Nova Scotia Sport Hall of Fame, Bill Robinson, knew I wasn't too afraid of crowds, so he said, would you MC this for us? And I did, and after the night, I thought I was going to do it for 1 year. And Pat Connolly said to me, you got it, son. Keep going. So I MC'd it every year. I knew the staff here. I knew their passion for sport and sport heroes. It rivaled mine, and in some cases exceeded mine. I knew their passion for making sure their stories, these heroes' stories, were told well, that they'd never be forgotten, that it's important that people in Guysborough have a hero, that people in Canso have a hero, that people in Yarmouth have a hero. I knew all of this, and this job came open, CEO of the Nova Scotia Sport Hall of Fame. So I said, I'm going to go for this. This is perfect. A chance to tell these stories, help these people tell these stories, preside over this building in which these stories are told beautifully. The displays help tell the story. I want to do that. I want our storytelling to be really good. I want our induction nights to be special. I want our events to be memorable. And lo and behold, I think the committee that was hiring could see this passion. I wasn't trying to disguise it. And I thank them to this day for offering me this gig. And here we sit today, I guess 18 months into my official tenure with the Nova Scotia Sport Hall of Fame.
There you go.
Yeah.
It's amazing. That is quite the story leading up to where you are now. I mean,
The job,
quite a
I mean,
bit.
it got to the point where, and if he's listening, he'll laugh, we wondered if my predecessor would ever retire. And every year he'd kind of hint he might, but then a year later there he was still in the job. When he finally did, and this job came open, I went after it pretty hard, I guess as hard as I could at the time while still living in PEI. And as I say, I was really proud of what we did on the island. I could walk away from that job and say, good job, gave it all I had, let's try something else. And this really does, I think your podcast ultimately is about passion and having your life's direction determined by your passion. And so if you can give me this for the next, I don't know how many years, but let's pick 15, I'll take that right now and sign that contract. To be able to sit here, work at this hall, meet these heroes, every single one of them is so humble. They actually are embarrassed to have their stories told. So I'm constantly fighting against that, which is charming to me. That's the Nova Scotia way. Oh, Bruce, I didn't play my sport to receive this honor. I understand, but you deserve it. And so that's part of my job every day, making sure that these men and women not only have their story told, but they come around to wanting to have their story told. And when we get to that point, that's where the real beautiful stuff happens.
The real magic
Yep.
happens. And that seems to me like a lot like what you previously said about climbing the ladder. You kind of dig it out of them and then try and find out what makes them work, and they have no idea what you're doing behind the curtains. So.
Yeah, I hope they don't.
Yeah.
Probably some do.
Probably
but
some.
yeah, part of it is making them comfortable with
Right.
the process of acclaim, right? Because none of them did do it for Crosby. Certainly, as a kid, didn't do it for what he's gotten, and to this day, he's the least impressed by what he's accomplished of anyone. Right? It's a wonderful. I think it's a Canadian trait, but it's really a Nova Scotian trait. It really is. I mentioned this top 15 event we did this summer. Everybody that came, from Sydney to Colleen Jones to Al McGuinness to Steve Giles, Karen Furno, Ellie Black, Jamie Bone, Mark DeYoung, Mark Smith, you name it, they all had this same quality of, I just did it because I loved it, and I'm so glad I was good at it. You know, that's very charming.
A lot
Absolutely.
of people that we're not highlighting may not have that ability to say as much. I mean, those that are chasing or pursuing their passions are able to go to bed at night saying, I did just that. A lot of what these folks have been able to say to
Well,
you.
if you are pursuing and you're doing it with your full heart, you not only go to bed, but you sleep well.
You sleep
because
well.
you know you're giving it your all.
Wake up
You're-
refreshed.
Yeah, and not only refreshed, but just mentally happy with the fact that you left nothing on the table. Right.
Right.
That's really
Exactly.
important, I think.
It really
Absolutely. You know, it's funny. We say in our bio, you know, we're providing a platform to our listeners for advice and inspiration, when in fact, it's been us who have the most impact it's been on so far.
is. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, when you're the conduit for your listeners, that's that might be broadcasting in its essence. It might be. If you
Absolutely.
want to bear it down to one sentence, you're the conduit for a message to your listeners or viewers, right? And the better conduit you are, the better that message, the better your show.
Absolutely.
Pretty simple.
Yeah.
And we're hoping to learn from each and every one of our guests, but we're certainly going to take a lot of what you're saying already into consideration and apply it. I mean, a lot of what you're suggesting now is something that we've been trying to emulate from the get-go. You know, building and developing that rapport so that we can rely on that trust aspect.
Yeah,
but
and
also,
just learn from each show.
Yeah.
You learn from each
Learn
show.
from
You
each one.
you listen to your tape. I was a horrific critic of myself. I'd go home every night and watch the show
Us
and
too.
just beat myself up and say, why didn't you do that there? Why did you do that there? I don't believe there's no such thing as the perfect broadcast. The best in the world will tell you they've never had it, right? And that's probably what keeps them coming back for the next broadcast, right? Keep trying for it.
There you
It's
go.
like the perfect game of golf. Tell me when you've played that,
Yeah.
and I'll show you someone who's telling you lies.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
All right.
You'll be sitting beside
18
those
hole in
folks.
ones.
Yeah,
Right,
You'll
right,
be
exactly,
sitting
yeah.
beside those folks that still haven't had the perfect podcast. I
Right.
think they have.
Yeah.
It's incredible, but we are very critical, but it's for that reason.
Yeah.
Right? We want to be better, so we want to improve. And how
Right.
are we
Hold
going
yourself
to do
up to a really high standard. That's
Yeah.
that's
Exactly. But we find ourselves doing that same bit where we're thinking we could have put words in such a spot, but
Yeah.
we end up shifting them later.
Yeah. So
The,
you.
the, the
we'll
key is,
edit
by
that
the way,
out.
on that. The key is just you don't beat yourself up. Don't take it that hard, but constructively critique yourself, right? And you don't. There's no benefit in self-flagellation, right? But there is benefit in self-analysis and self-critique. So
Exactly.
you find that balance.
You can't dwell on you made that mistake in the show. You think about how do I not make the mistake in the show
Right,
tomorrow.
because people listening, I don't think care that you made the mistake.
Right.
Most people, if they like what you're doing, there's a great old expression. I don't know who coined it originally, but if they like what they're doing, your audience is there to see you through and not see through you. And what that means, I think, is this. If you cough or clear your throat, that might drive you nuts in the middle of a podcast. Why couldn't I have suppressed that? Nobody cares. If you stumble over a word and you say, oh, I'm smoother than that, nobody really cares if they're enjoying the show. They're there to see you through.
I really like that.
Yeah.
That's
Makes me feel a lot
Yeah,
better.
that's going to make us feel a lot better, a lot
Yeah.
more positive. and
Yeah.
everything.
Awesome.
For sure.
So you said you're doing a lot of really cool stuff at the Sport Hall of Fame so far. What are some of the things, whether it's events or initiatives that you have going on right now here?
Biggest one we did when I came on board, Canada was in the midst of the 150th, okay, the Canada 150, and so when I came on board, I had a couple of phone calls with the key staff here, and I said, could we do this thing where we name the top 15 athletes in Nova Scotia history, 15 being a natural numerical derivative of 150. We couldn't do 150, that's a big project, but could we do 15? So we put together huge committees of past and current athletes, coaches, broadcasters, builders from every part of the province, every culture, every gender, every race, everything we could think of. We wanted a really transparent, thorough process. And we put this top 15 project together. And I kind of hoped it would be large and get people talking. It became a little bit of a small P phenomenon. And we get calls every day, sometimes debating, sometimes chastising, sometimes congratulating. But people were talking about it. And we were able to parlay this whole project into a really good book that we wrote, which is like a brand new history of Nova Scotia sport, and into a dinner that I think is the best sports dinner that was ever held in Halifax. Back in July. It was the best for this reason. We didn't pay anybody to come. They were all Nova Scotians who were proud to be there, okay? And the biggest part is that these were all Nova Scotian athletes. They weren't brought in from the NFL, Major League Baseball. They were all proud Nova Scotians who had accomplished ridiculous things in their particular fields, just world-class athletes. So the best one I've ever been a part of, and I'm very biased, but I'm really proud of it too. So that was the big thing in year one. Going forward, when you're talking about a nonprofit organization, the main thing is revenue generate to the degree that you can stay afloat. That's very big every year. You want to stay open. You want
Keep
the
the lights
events.
on.
Got to do it. You want the events you do to be of high quality. You want people to come back. So we take a real big pride in our events here, be it Songwriters Circle with Bruce Guthrow, or invitational golf tournaments at Fox Harbor, or dinners where we honor up-and-coming future Hall of Famers. We want those to be really, really good. So there's just this is daily work. This is, I mean, it's a 5-person staff that event plans, revenue generates, honors athletes, and you can't stop. You can't stop. So daily challenges that kind of fall under one of those headings.
Makes it all fun.
Yeah.
It does. It's great work. This should be a really fun place to work.
That's
Absolutely.
awesome.
You know,
100%.
challenges are just those. We believe there are no problems, only solutions, and we'll get it done. Right. And I have a staff here that's magnificent. So they buy in. Once we come up with a vision, boy, it's going to be executed. Right.
That's great.
It's fun to
Now,
watch.
I noticed a common theme with some of those events that you mentioned, very interactive. Is that on purpose?
In the sense that you can.
Well, in the sense that the Songwriters Circle it's close. People can get involved, and with the dinner, people are coming up and speaking. You can go and walk around to different tables and meet new people.
Yeah.
It's very networking is at the forefront of them. It seems.
And that is part of what we're all about as well, right? The more people that know our story and hear it, and meet those that have done remarkable things, that just helps us propagate, right? It's like having an extra staff member out there doing your work. We like things to be intimate and memorable. You know yourself, seeing Springsteen in the 973-seat theater on Broadway is so intimate and memorable. Seeing him in a huge stadium is cool too, but that's why Springsteen on Broadway has been such a runaway success, because you're seeing this massive star in a tiny theater. You're right there. You can reach out and literally touch him. So we've had
Feel
events
sweat.
where you can reach out and literally touch Nova Scotia Sport Hall of Famers, right? Hear their stories. What made them tick? What motivated them? What do they love? What were their challenges? What was their socioeconomic status growing up? What in their geography was a challenge?
Relatabilities.
What kind of homes did they come from, right?
Same kind of thing we're asking about.
Exactly.
I think so.
Very inclusive,
Mhm.
very interactive,
Yep.
very relatable. It's
Those
all-
are
all part
good
of it.
founding principles
Yeah,
right there. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, we've highlighted a lot of positive facts thus far, and I'm not trying to dig any negative ones out, but where were some of the roadblocks? Where were some of the stumblings along the way?
Challenges. I think there's if you're glib by nature and you're quick on a retort, a big challenge for me early on was if you're too quick on a retort, you can hurt someone. If you say something that you think is really funny, but it crosses a line of race, gender, sexuality, religion, or politics, glibness can be your own worst enemy. And as a kid, I prided myself on a quick retort. And a couple of times, I think I hurt people and had to apologize. And I learned at that point that it's much more important, I think, to be respectful than to be glib, right? And you don't need to be funny or glib by poking fun's the wrong word, but by questioning sexuality, religion, politics, age, race, gender. These are things that just leave it alone, right? Leave it alone. People are living their lives,
Right.
and they've made choices, and it's none of your business why they made the choices. So don't try to be funny and in a way be judgmental. That was a challenge for me as a kid. I'll give you a really good example. Okay, we did this thing called Swap Shop on radio CJLS. It's where people buy, sell, and trade on the air. All right, and I'm not particularly proud of this, but I'll share it with you. So
We appreciate that.
yeah, so this guy calls up one morning and he said, "I need a drive this weekend to Université Sainte Anne." That's exactly how he said it. And I repeated, thinking I was just helping him. I said, "So you need to drive to St. Anne's University?" And he said, "No, it's Université Sainte Anne. This is happening live on radio." And I said, "Right, St. Anne's University." He goes, No, Université Sainte Anne." He said, "Haven't you heard of French immersion?" And I said really quickly, "Yes, but I don't think we hold them under long enough." Okay? Glib and quick, right?
That is the best.
Well, yeah. However, my boss calls me in after, and he says, "Bruce, look at the map." Okay? And I look at the map.
You're in Clare.
You're in Clare, right? You're broadcasting to Digby County, areas like Concession, Church Point, these beautiful little French communities, right? Some of them might get that joke, but some of them might think you're being an ass. Don't be an ass. You don't need to be, right? And that's a good, important role. The two things my first ever boss, he was a guy named Grant Wyman, he told me, and they were so important. One, always assume that any microphone is on and live. Right, the second you walk into that studio is not the time to be cursing at someone outside the door,
Mike's
because
up.
that'll follow you forever. And the second thing was, don't be an ass. That's good advice.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
Just don't be an ass.
Don't be an ass.
No, and that sounds so simple, but when you're young and cocky and full of piss and vinegar, don't be an ass can be a hard mantra to follow. But you learn it as you get older, and you learn that he was absolutely right. Be respectful. Be respectful. The person that is coming on your show to talk about their ability to grow begonias in West Pubnico does not deserve your mocking or disdain. They're making your show better. They're giving you their time. Respect them.
Yeah.
There were hundreds of times where I'd sit beside a politician, and in my head I'd be thinking, this man or woman is full of crap, right? What are my choices? I can go all Fox News on them and start a screaming match, or I can be respectful, ask the questions, challenge the answers, but don't leave where we've had a rip-roaring fight. Nobody benefits from that, and ultimately the viewer, I think, gets sick of the two people screaming and want you to ask a legitimate question.
Yeah.
Be respectful. These are things I learned, and you mentioned the challenge. That was a challenge for me because I prided myself and thought that glibness was akin to greatness. It isn't. Respectfulness is.
So every turn that you were knocked down, you were able to apply the lessons learned and ultimately develop your portfolio.
Yeah.
And it becoming such a sound broadcaster.
I hope so. And as I say, there was never a perfect interview or perfect broadcast. But by the end of it, I never wanted anybody to be afraid to come in and sit with me. I always wanted them to know they'd be challenged, right? And I would present a devil's advocate opposite side, but in a way that was respectful and in a way that we could shake hands and say, let's do it again sometime at the end of it.
And
That
fair.
was the way I got through it. And there are different ways. People have had enormous success in the States, especially on Fox News, just by screaming and getting in people's faces. Good for them, and they've made a lot of money, so power to them. But that was not my style and was never
your
going to be.
style.
No.
And when did you find your style? When did you know, okay, this is how Bruce is going to do it?
Tremendous question. Early on, when I was told to not be an ass, for sure, I would say I found my style at a very early point when I interviewed a veteran from World War II. And if you guys ever get that opportunity, and it's fleeting now because not many are left, but this person clearly did not want to chat about these memories, and yet I think wanted to, if you know what I mean. But it was going to take some work. And I think I learned how to navigate a situation in that instance, right? And it turned out to be just remarkable. And what this person shared probably was stuff he had never shared even with family before. And so you learn that there's an old expression, you get more with something than something. I don't know what it is, but I think that I learned at that point, if you're respectful, magic could follow. Yeah.
And there was something in you that obviously
Mom
picked
and
up
Dad.
on the fact that
Sure,
he was wanting to share more.
We were all raised by someone, and if you have a good mom and dad or a good father figure in your life or a good mother figure or a good paternal figure, a good big brother, big sister, whatever, and you watch how they handle themselves. And my dad was good in a crowd, still is. He was good, get people laughing, but know when to tone it down. You learn from them ultimately, right?
Yeah.
Those are your building blocks right there.
Guiding lights.
Yep.
For sure. And you have such a sound way of being right now.
I hope so.
Yeah,
I hope
it's
so.
quite clear that you come from
we're-
a
you know what?
bigger sound.
It's the benefit of getting older too, right? And you settle
Learning
down.
things.
You marry a great woman. You have kids, and then you realize that these two little dudes are looking at you and modeling their behavior after you to a large extent. So you better behave. You better be respectful. You better hold open that door for the senior who's struggling with their groceries, right? And now I see my boy do that, and I know where he learned it, and I'm happy.
That's great. Kind of comes back to,
Full circle.
always pretend there's a mic in front of you.
Always. That's for you guys and for anybody. When I talk to kids and they ask what are your two biggest pieces of advice, or three, whatever, I say always say make sure you love to read. It's the only way you're going to keep up on stuff and ask good questions is know a bit about a person. Make sure you love to listen, and make sure you know or think that the mic is always on, because that'll kill your career instantly. Right? The one F-bomb that you thought nobody heard, that all of a sudden people are Googling and having it go viral, sticks with you forever now. So
Right.
total caution when that microphone's on.
Definitely.
It's like we wanted to go viral, but not that way.
Not that way.
Not that way.
No.
No. And those lessons, unfortunately, nowadays are being learned harder and harder.
Well, there's a camera everywhere.
But there's
right?
a camera everywhere. Teachers,
so
Everyone has
getting at
one.
the worst, probably.
Mhm.
Man.
Yep.
Everyone's always watching, so you best just be respectful, as if being respectful wasn't enough good reason,
Right.
but now everyone's watching.
Don't just act it. Live it. It should come naturally.
should.
Should.
Yep.
Doesn't always, but
Yeah.
when we work on it.
We all have our moments, but
Yeah.
but if you fundamentally are respectful and try to limit your disdain for people, places, or things, I think that's a good starting point for sure.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So as I look around, we're taping in Bruce's office right now. I see a Bobby Orr jersey, a Guy Lafleur seat. I assume, is that from the Forum?
Yeah.
The original seat from the Forum.
Right.
Interesting, the juxtaposition of the Canadians and Bruins gear there.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess how much of a role does sports play outside of work for you?
Massive. I want my boys to play. I want to continue to play, watch, and enjoy. Sports teaches you a lot of things. I think it, depending on your age, teaches you to be a better person, husband, father, wife, competitor, winner, loser. All of that's really important. I loved Guy Lafleur growing up. He was my hero. But I had the wherewithal to realize that Bobby Orr was probably a better player. So I've always been fascinated by each of them. Lafleur was so exciting. Met him a few times now. First time I met him was for an interview, and I didn't think it would bother me. It was a long time ago that he had been my boyhood hero. But I was so messed up that I introduced myself as Guy Rainnie. And he said, "Your name is Guy too?" And I said, "No, I'm just really nervous." And he was wonderful. Bobby Orr is a great guy. Here's an interesting thing you'll like. I asked Bobby Orr at the end of an interview, I said, if you could play one more shift in the NHL, who'd be your teammates? And he actually said, you know what? Nobody's at, and I was thrilled that nobody had ever asked him. And he said, here's what he said, and this gets to an interesting point. He said, I'd probably have Bernie Perrant or Ken Dryden in goal. I said, cool. My defense partner
defenseman.
would, yeah, not bad. My defense partner would be Bork or Larry Robinson.
Oh yeah,
I said, okay, good. He goes, Wayne would be at center, Gretzky. Gordy would be at right wing, and then there's a big pause, and he goes, this was 5 years ago when he said this. I'd have Sydney at left wing. I said, what? Already? He goes, yep, he's that good.
Wow.
I'd want him on the ice with me. This was
Wow.
5 years ago. I said, are you serious? And the amazing thing about that is that Bobby Orr has an agency. He has players, and Sydney's not one of them. So he was picking someone that's not even in his stable. But I thought that was a wonderful compliment to Crosby to have Bobby Orr pick
Absolutely.
him as his all-time
That's incredible.
line mate, right?
Yeah, I thought he was going to pick his dad or something.
Yeah, no.
Some family member.
Pick Sid Crosby.
Sid Crosby.
Right, who at that point was 26 years old. The other poster I got signed here, that's a legendary Canadian singer-songwriter who is not your vintage. His name is Murray McLaughlin. And he and I, through fate and circumstance, have developed a really nice friendship through the years. His most famous song is one called The Farmer's Song, which has a chorus that goes, straw hat and old dirty hanky, mopping a face like a shoe. Brilliant, brilliant guy. And it's nice to have him in my life, too. Smart,
Cool.
smart fella.
How'd you meet
drawn
him?
to his words?
Met him, drawn to his words and his musicianship and his ability to be a comic and a musician and his turn of phrase, maybe the best turn of phrase of any human I've ever encountered. Met him just through interviews, got along well with him, hired him for a couple of CBC events. He and I have had lunches where I just like to listen to a wordsmith put them together. Very smart guy, very smart guy with a gorgeous turn of phrase. With a great story. Trouble with his dad. His dad didn't want him to be a musician. Kicked him out of the house with 35 cents in his pocket at the age of 17. Just a
Wow.
good story, too, right? So
Does he want to come on the podcast?
We know
you'd like him. You'd like him.
It's always fascinated me too how folks play with words, and it's incredible to see how many similarities you have with folks that are highlighting around your office or who you've interviewed already. They seem to share those same traits where they're able to really dangle words. in front
Maybe
of
I've
you.
sought them out too, because
Yeah, definitely.
I love to listen to
Yeah.
someone. We all like to be entertained, right?
Right.
And
You think that's an easy one, but then when you try and do it yourself, it's not so easy.
And I've always enjoyed being entertained by the spoken word, right? Nothing better than a really good 16 to 18 minute compact speech.
Great
That
storytelling.
starts hot, so it hooks you, develops a bit of context, and then peaks at about the 15-minute mark with something you never saw coming, and it just wraps up elegantly. I love that sort of thing. Yeah.
Looking back on my history, 12 years of school, a couple of years at university, I don't know how many lectures along the way, but the ones I remember most were the instructors or the person who was at the front of the room. Really, I don't even remember the message. I remember them delivering the message. So
And being captivated, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
They could hold a room better than the next, and it didn't matter if the room was full of kids or adults. It just seemed as though they commanded the attention from the moment they walked in.
And I bet you that person wasn't married to PowerPoint.
Right.
They were instead making great eye contact,
Walking around the room.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and making you ultimately feel like you were being spoken to one-on-one.
Exactly.
Yeah,
That's the
exactly.
key.
You were in a crowd of 30, but you ultimately felt like they were one-on-one.
Right.
Yeah, and that's really the goal. We're just trying to create memorable moments. We want you to be listening to the podcast and you're spooning your yogurt into your mouth, and all of a sudden you hear something, and you just drop your spoon. It's like, wow, that kind of moment.
I needed to hear it from someone else, but there I go.
Yeah. Those are good moments.
They sure are.
Yeah, they don't come all the time, but you know it when they happen, and you can play a role in creating them. You really can.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Even
And-
if we can touch one, that's
Yeah.
more than we started with. So.
Yep, and keeping an open-minded attitude is a common theme we've seen across all of our guests.
I think open mind. You asked me what was the commonality between the people I listed off earlier, the ones that have achieved really good things, and open mind is high on that list too. There's no question. Open to new things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Why restrict yourself?
Right. There's a great lyric in a song called "Racing in the Street," which is Song 4, Side 1, "Darkness on the Edge of Town," Bruce Springsteen. He says it's the most autobiographical line he ever wrote. It says, "Some guys, they just give up living and start dying little by little, piece by piece. But some guys come home from work and wash up and go racing in the street." And you want to be the second person. You want to be that person that washes up and does something.
I think I might have that
Keep
vinyl,
moving.
by the way.
It's
Yeah.
a good album.
Yeah.
It's a really good album. Yeah.
It is an amazing album.
Yeah.
I
He
love
also,
Springsteen.
I'll tell you one last thing about him. I had the chance to meet him in Calgary. I was hosting an event for CBC, Spruce Meadows show jumping, horses jumping over rails. Don't ask me how I got the gig. And his daughter was in it. His daughter's really good. She's a world-class equestrian, ranked 68th in the world. And he was there watching her compete. And he and I wound up at a same table for a lunch. musical hero of mine, and I was trying not to gush and not even look at him really. But at the end, we talked a bit, and one question I did ask him was, how have you kept your band together for 50 years?
Great question.
Because if you're a music fan, you know bands are put together to break up. Mm-hmm. They're going to break up. And he talked about them all having a common vision, then he talked about him having this goal and them buying in. And then he had a line that's the greatest definition of leadership I've ever heard, and it's not in Webster's. He said that leadership to me has always been about the ability to awaken possibility in my bandmates. And I almost started crying. And if you watch him, you watch the solos he gives his band members and the challenges he gives them and the praise he gives them, and how it's always Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band. Awaken possibility in your bandmates. That's a pretty good lesson for life, right?
Absolutely.
And
sounds like a hell of a leader.
he's the best. He's the best. Yeah, there's some YouTube videos where he's just taking his guys and there's women in his band too, taking them to places they never thought they could go, right? And they're loving it.
Wow.
So yeah,
Absolutely.
pretty cool.
Hitting it right on the head of the nail here.
Yeah. Stayed with him for 50 years.
Mhm.
I mean, wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible, but it goes back to that humbleness that we find in these folks.
Humility's a great thing.
Humility.
Yeah. Yeah, we find that as just a common characteristic of athletes we honor here at the Nova Scotia. If you ask me what's the most common, it's not athletic greatness, it's humility. Every single one of them never did it for acclaim, never did it for money, never did it for fame. They just did it because they loved it and thought they maybe were representing their community well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, team inducted into our hall called the Brookfield Elks, softball team out of Truro. They never even they were the best team in the country one year, won the Canadian Championships in, I want to say 1980. Never would accept a sponsorship from a beer company or car company. They just wanted to be Brookfield Elks from their town. And they didn't bring in players from other parts of the country. They wanted to be the Brookfield Elks from Brookfield. That's the essence of the Nova Scotia athlete. Proud of your place. Don't give us any extra help. We're going to be okay on our own. We're going to make it on our own, and we're going to be proud of it because we did, right? That's pretty cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I think with your message, I mean, that's probably what's going to resonate most is just how you were able to persevere. But I haven't heard much of you getting down. It was always a clear vision past the knee. I think it's pretty incredible. We always talk about this, how we can just recognize that folks didn't have those moments where they ever felt like they wanted to quit. And you may obviously have had those moments, but we've always kind of envied that in our peers or in our successful stories that are ahead of us, where for whatever reason those people, they don't let the doubt creep in. So obviously facing doubt and meeting it head on and knowing what to do with it, that's something that I think you've been able to do really well. I guess that was a long-winded way of saying.
Well, you know what? The other thing that can't be overlooked, and it sounds so simple, but all of this is lovely to say, but you got to put the work in. You got to work. I in my career as a broadcaster, I saw a lot of these two types of people. Number one was the poor soul that worked his or her butt off, but just didn't have the talent, didn't have the ability to string together the phrase or just write beautifully, or you could just tell they just didn't quite have it. That always saddened me. What maddened me was the person that was overflowing with talent but was lazy. That drove me bananas, because I thought, you make this look so easy, but you're going to plateau because you're lazy, and you don't want to work the overtime on the Friday night because you don't want to miss your whatever. Put the time in, you know? And so I've always believed this: if you have a strong, lethal dose of both of those, talent and work ethic, there is no boss anywhere. Maybe there is. There are a few bosses anywhere thick enough not to recognize that combination, right? It's so rare. It is so rare. It doesn't sound like it will be, but that's what. There is no coincidence at all to me that the best hockey player in the world is also the hardest worker. There is no coincidence to me that LeBron James, at the age of 34, is somehow still the best basketball player in the NBA because he works the hardest on his body and his game, right? Roger Federer trains in 5 hours a day, Dubai heat, at a resort, to be still one of the top tennis players in the world at age 37. I remember
that's just unheard of in the sport of tennis.
It totally is. It's
27
ancient, right?
You're gone.
I remember I got to know Katrina LeMay Doan really well. Ellie Black is a great local example. I asked Ellie Black one time, in all seriousness, in an interview situation much like this, I said, how much time do you take off a year? And she kind of put her head down and smiled and got sheepish, and she said, I really don't. What are you talking about? Like, not a day?
Take time off.
No. I said, seriously? She goes, well, I know that Simone Biles isn't taking a day off, and I'd love to beat her someday, and it's that sort of work ethic and talent. Ellie never won a thing until her 4th year of gymnastics. She was not a child prodigy. Steve Giles is the greatest canoeer the province has ever produced. He could not even stay in a canoe without tipping it for his first year, right? He had to be rescued by police boats.
No way.
Yeah.
Perseverance, then.
Al McGuinness was such a crappy skater with his midget team out of Antigonish that they moved him to defense from right wing, and the coach tried to soften it by saying, no, we're just shifting. And he knew.
I heard this
He
story.
knew. Yeah, I mean, these stories are, I love these stories, but the great Nova Scotia athlete, the great success story at any level is someone who can combine this hard work and talent, right? And you need more of the former than the latter, but a liberal dose of both, and it's sky the limit sort of thing to what you can accomplish. So
That's probably why there's 800 NHLers as opposed to the 8 million that play across the country.
well, those guys, I think they probably, if you boil it down, want it more. Want it more, and just put the time in. And
All skilled, but
yeah, and to go back to Yarmouth, there was nothing I said no to in my first 3-4 years there. Can you work the weekend? Yes. Can you do the remote at Wilson Shopping Centre in Barrington Passage? Yes. Can you fill in for this guy Saturday? Don't. Yes, I will. All of these things. Just don't.
Say yes.
Yeah, and if you're starting out in any business, I think you say no at your peril. I really do. Say yes. Say yes. Learn.
dive in.
Right.
Especially if it's something you're not good at. Go do it.
Why would you ever say no to
There's a reason
possibility?
you're not good at it.
Well, you might because you're lazy.
Well, that's
Right.
true.
Yeah. Or you want to do something that's not as challenging. A lot of humans, sadly, a lot of us are what's the word? Entropy, the path of least resistance. We seek to find it, but those that don't, they're the names we're talking about. They're the names we continue to talk about.
And they really get the most out of life.
They're the ones that get inducted into our Nova Scotia Sport Hall of Fame every year. They're the ones. This year, for the first time ever, we inducted a horse, some beach somewhere, greatest harness racing horse in history. And this trainer out of Truro by the name of Brent McGrath convinced 7 other people to spend $40,000 on this horse combined. They bought him for $40,000, and at last count, he had made them on the track and as a sire until his death in the neighborhood of $48 million. Know your stuff.
Yep.
Know who you're buying. Be able to spot the diamond in the rough, right?
Trust your gut.
Yep. As long as your gut is well informed.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So before we get out of here, you mentioned to us that you are the journalist in residence at UPEI.
Right.
So what does that entail?
So, this was something I wanted to do for a long time. They had approached me back in my days at CBC, but the rules at CBC and conflict of interest, you can't really work for a university that you might have to report on in a negative way. That's conflict of interest at its very level. I understood. It ticked me off at the time, but I understood. So when I left CBC, the president of the university, a really bright guy by the name of Dr. Ala Abdelaziz, said, "Can you do this now?" And I said, "I think I still can, yeah." And so there's a program at UPEI called Applied Communication, Leadership and Culture. It's in its 2nd year. And what I get to do about 4 or 5 times a year is go over and help these students, many of them are international students now, with their public presentation. Because since the advent, and for your listeners, I'm holding up a Samsung Galaxy S8. Since the advent of this, the device, we collectively are not as good at talking anymore. I believe that. We cannot get our point across as well. We can text like crazy, we can send the email, our thumbs are better than they've ever been, but we're not as good at talking anymore. Yet, the key moments in your life will boil down to you being able to impress a future boss or command a room. They will not boil down to you being able to send a text quickly, guaranteed. So that's my point. That's my premise when I go talk to these kids, and I like to help them with their public presentation. Their oral presentation, their ability to speak publicly, their ability to command that room when the time comes. And it's sometimes it's tough slugging. It really is, because as I say, this generation is just not as good at it as they once were. They've become very reliant on the technology. I think technology is hugely important, and I use this a lot too. But I think the ability to turn a phrase, maybe coin a phrase, work a room, work a future employer, ultimately is hugely important. So that's my role as journalist in residence. Plus, if they want to get into newspaper, radio, or TV, they can ask me any questions because I've worked at all three. And skills that are important for each beyond reading and writing, those sorts of things.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's
I
great.
think
I
that's a
love
really
it.
cool story.
I love
Yeah.
it. And as I say,
It's only in its second year.
the international student too. That's a tough thing because for most of them, English is not their second language. So it's or first language. So I have to, make sure my presentation is at a pace that they can understand and at a pace that they're going to get something from, and it has to accommodate the fact that their English might be stilted and jilted at the moment, and we've got to make sure that they have a good set of skills to present well too. So.
And this may be a touch personal, but are you fearful of where society is heading with communication?
I'm very fearful of where media is headed, and I'll tell you why. For me, the thing that was ingrained in me from day one was get it right. Make sure you hit your deadline, but get it right. It's almost become more important in this day and age to get it first.
Yeah.
Get it in.
Right. Publish it first. And how many times have you seen retractions in the last decade? They are as frequent as original stories.
Oh, you see at the top.
All the time. Some news agency is apologizing for a mistake they made. Mistakes are not, to me, they're not acceptable and never go to air unless you have it. Here's the other thing that bothers me. Every good story I've ever encountered has two sides. There are always two sides to a story. Two sides are tough to encompass in 140 characters in a tweet. So I think I am fearful of where the media is going. I really am. You should not rely on a single tweet for your daily news. There's still the beauty in a well-told story with a beginning, middle, end. There's still beauty in a story with an arc, but there's most beauty in a story with facts that have been checked and double-checked and then put to print or to broadcast. So yeah, I'm worried because this race to get it first now I think supersedes the race to be right, right? The need to be right. So yes, I'm concerned about that. If you're asking me if I'm fearful of where society is going, that's beyond my pay grade. But I think sociologists would tell you that we don't communicate as well as we once did, and communication is the bedrock of everything. So by that extension, yeah, I'd probably be a little fearful. Yeah.
Thank you.
But I'd like to end on a somewhat lighter note.
Yeah. How about my age-old question and answer to this question that comes to me every time I speak in front of kids? This will be a light note and a defining moment for you, okay? What's the funniest thing that ever happened to you on air? You want it?
Yeah.
To this day, this is it for me.
I think we might know it.
Okay.
If it was a flub.
It wasn't.
Okay.
There's been some of those too. Those have been beauties. This is my favorite moment ever. Radio CJLS in Yarmouth. Swap shop. Buy-seller trade on the radio. So popular that one caller could and did conceivably eat up the entire 3-minute segment with a list of perhaps 40 to 50 items. Would not stop, would not take a breath, couldn't stop this person. We had to institute a rule, and I remember a staff meeting for this. How many items are we going to allow a caller on Swap Shop? And we chose 3. It seemed fair. 3 is a great number in our culture. It's easy to understand. It's not too many, it's not too few. A maximum of 3 items per call. The first day this new rule is in place, the first day I'm hosting Swap Shop. 742-9285, your chance to buy, sell, or trade here on CJLS. Good morning, you're on the air. Very first caller goes, hello? I go, yes, sir, go ahead. He goes, I have 4 items for sale. Right away, first caller. And I'm thinking in my head, oh man, why me? So I very politely say, sir, we appreciate the call, we really do, but we now only allow a maximum of 3. And there's this huge pause, and he goes, okay, I have 3 tires for sale. Now I lost it. I'm pressing my mic. I turn it off because I'm trying not to laugh. And I realize that I've talked him out of selling 4 tires, got him down to 3. So I go back on and I say, "Sir, do you want to just call that a set of tires?" And he goes, "Good idea." That to me, for many a reason, just for the charm and the fact that this happened live on the fly, remains a defining moment, right? And it goes back to the fact that I could have mocked and had fun with this, but this guy was taking the time to call. These items were important for him to sell, and we eventually got him to his rightful destination.
Yeah.
So
And you got a
it
great
encompasses
joke.
a lot of the
It's hilarious.
a lot of the lessons we've talked about here
Yeah.
in 90 minutes.
Definitely does.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Encompasses it very well.
Absolutely. And I think with that, we'll end it there. We appreciate you taking the time, Bruce. It's been awesome.
Good luck, boys, and let me do one plug. Nova Scotia Sport Hall of Fame is open 10 to 5 weekdays, and for special events. You know what the admission is to get in here? Free.
$0, folks.
Come on by and see us. We're proud of what we got here. You'll be proud to be in here, and you'll, I guarantee, leave with something you didn't know prior to coming
Right.
in.
Come get inspired.
Yeah. Gentlemen, thank you.
And with that, we'll leave you, and we'll see you next week on Brand New View.
I was the same old me with the same old blues, with the same old blues, with the same old blues. I was the same old me with the same old blues. I was the same old me with the same old blues. I was the same old me with the same old blues. I was the same old me. I was the same old me. I was the same old